Welcome to the Rant Live. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome to the Rant Live with a couple guys from Cubs Insider. We're here to talk about the Chicago Cubs. Not a lot going on, but they did hire an assistant general manager, Ehsan Bokhari. And I think I just pronounced his name correctly. Which
I
is
think
for
pretty
me,
close. I think it's Ehsan.
Ehsan. Okay.
I think it's S. I think that's, well, going by the pronunciation guide that they put at the, and it's kind of funny, right? Because they put out a press release and they put the pronunciation at the very bottom, like italicized. Like, shouldn't you
Like
put
at
it
the
right
end?
after his name when you first put it in there? Like, make that, which I did when I wrote the piece. I like pushed it up to the front because I'm like, I feel like that's fairly important because, it's not like his name is Jed Hoyer or Carter Hawkins. That, like, nobody's gonna screw up. You know what I mean? Like, this is something I think is important. But either way, I'm pretty stoked about the hire, to be honest, and I'm a little bit surprised by it. Yeah, the way they put it in there is Ehsan, Essesen,
Ehsan, okay.
ES.
I almost got it.
That's what it's. It's pretty close, all things considered.
Historically, I'm very bad at.
I was gonna say I'm happy that you.
Oh.
I'm proud of you for walking out on that thin ice and for it not cracking and sending you into the cold waters beneath on that one. So that's good.
For those on the podcast, I am holding my hands above my head as if I have been victorious in some way, shape, or form, which I've clearly not been.
Small, but you know what? You need to take pride in those small victories, though. If all we do,
especially the small ones,
if all you're waiting for is a walk-off grand slam to celebrate, you're going to be waiting a hell of a long time. So you know what?
Particularly
celebrate those
me.
Infield singles. Yeah,
I ain't getting.
Which,
any
if you were the Braves, you'd have a hell of a
slams.
lot of infield singles. They had like at least 3 of them last night.
So Ehsan Bokhari, he's 38, I think. Carter Hawkins is 37. So, 2 young, fairly progressively minded guys coming into the assistant GM role under Jed Hoyer. Obviously that feels about as good as these 2 hires can feel, I think, if you're looking at it from the perspective of, hey, you want to be more progressive. And I think that's where Theo always kind of the side that Theo came out on. I just don't think he was able to kind of execute in the long term. But what do you think about these 2 guys and how that kind of translates into progressively kind of becoming a team that can always be around and in the play, not bad, not as bad as they've just been.
Well, ideally, I think it's what's interesting is you've gotten these guys. So Hawkins, we've discussed this, and it's been kind of I don't know, ballyhooed is the right way we want to go there, but a lot of people have talked about his and Cleveland organization. It would have been the Indians when he was there, and now it's the Guardians, and their ability to develop pitching. Whether that's drafting and developing or seeking those guys out and kind of building them up from maybe having already started a professional career. So you look at the pitching, but before let's backtrack a little bit. They made some big differences in terms of their development infrastructure with Justin Stone as the director of hitting and then Craig Breslow as the director of pitching. Breslow has since been elevated to assistant GM and VP of pitching. Well, then you go and you bring in Carter Hawkins, who's your general manager, who has got a focus on development, specifically pitching. Then you go get Bokhari, who again has some experience in baseball ops. Largely, he's a very academic, right? The guy's got a PhD in quantitative psychology, right, from the University of Illinois. Yeah, it sounds pretty sexy, at least. But he's got an academic bent, but he's apparently, again, very progressive, very statistically minded, but then understands. So you think, well, hey, quantitative psychology. Well, gee, what did we hear about Hawkins? Is using available data and figuring out how to break that down and digest it and then disseminate that to the players. Well, psychology, again, is how people think, and there's a lot more to it than that, but maybe there's a guy who can do that. But Bokhari also developed the Astros proprietary internal pitch grading system. So again, you look at everything they've done, and they've gone really heavily toward the pitching side after having built their World Series team around hitters, right? Position players largely. And so it's an interesting shift. I don't think they've gotten away from the position players, but I think what they've seen pretty clearly is that there's not as long lasting a hit there. You know, they did get their quick hit, but I think now what they're looking at is developing not really the way the Mets did, because the Mets have kind of flamed out. There's all kinds of fun stuff about them going on in the news too. But I do like where they're going with this, and sort of the trend that this has taken with some younger guys from different organizations. Bokhari was with the Dodgers before he was with the Astros. So now you've got 3 organizations that are really, really renowned for their ability to develop players in general and pitchers in particular. So, I like it a lot. I like that Hoyer is bringing in these outside voices, and some guys who are, clearly familiar with the organization, just from, as they all should be. When you work in that position, you got to know what other people are doing. But I think it says a lot that you're getting a guy who has been employed by last year's World Series winner. And of course, the Dodgers were always competitive during the time that he was there. And then in the last 3 years, he's been with the Astros, who are currently in the World Series. And for him to leave that organization to come to a Cubs organization that is rebuilding, I don't want to equate that to the John Lester deal and kind of coming over and believe. But I think you do have to have a belief in an organization to say, like, they're coming off this shitty season, but gosh, I think they really have something going, and I want to be a part of this moving forward. That says a lot to me. So I have rambled long enough. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. It's, you look at these 2 guys and you feel pretty good about it. Like I said, I mean, 2 progressive minded guys. The one thing, it's like when the Cubs made all the trades that they made at the trade deadline, it seemed like they were getting, kind of, I don't want to say overcorrecting, but are you afraid that perhaps where they went and they got all these high contact guys, and now that's what they've pushed on the offensive side? It seems they made those changes. It feels like perhaps they could have been overcorrecting a little bit from, kind of these power swing and miss guys to high contact guys with low power. And they made these trades. I mean, it would have, to me, a perfect world would have been to have the GM and the assistant GM on board before you went and made the trades, so that they could have weighed in. So obviously they came in to, the organization the way that it is with the players that they traded for. And it's not to say that that was any more or less appealing to them. That's kind of what I'm getting at, is it's like, it would have been better to have these 2 guys on board before they went and traded all these guys away. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of how they go forward in free agency, to fill the gaps that they may perceive as being there. And obviously there are a lot of gaps there, but if there's one big gap, it's the power, right?
Yeah, I mean, it looks that way. And of course, the whole free agency thing, right? I mean, Rob Manfred can be as confident as he wants to be. Of course, he's not going to say, "Yeah, I think we're going to have labor strife starting." I think we're going to be in a work stoppage, December 2nd. And I know the players union, and the picture I put out today for the rundown was Manfred and Tony Clark talking before game 1 last night. So it's kind of funny. It is a funny looking picture, actually, because it looks like Rob's trying to explain something to him. The last thing you want, Manfred, to just keep his mouth shut publicly anyway.
Literally,
yeah. But no, I there are some concerns, although, I think Brennan Davis is going to develop some really nice pop. I mean, we're seeing Nelson Velasquez right now. He tore it up during the regular season, despite getting a little bit of a late start. He's killing it in the AFL right now. And you look at some of the other guys they picked up, Alexander Canario, Bryce Ball. So they did get some guys that have, and both of those latter 2 certainly, and Velasquez has some swing and miss issues, particularly in 2 strikes. He chases a lot. But Ball and Canario are both guys who've got plenty of swing and miss in their game, with some serious thunder. But then you look at, like, Pete Crow Armstrong is definitely more the contact, not really a power-based guy at all. Nicky Two Strikes, Nick Madrigal, definitely not a power guy at all. If Nico Horner, whether he's the shortstop or plays a bunch of roles, they didn't just pick him up, but hopefully he's actually healthy enough to play a more vital role. No power, big contact. So it is a little bit interesting. I do think they're going to need to go out there and find some more power, unless you think Patrick Wisdom can continue in that regard. And then, there's kind of your balance, right? Okay, Here, I'll see your Patrick Wisdom with a ton of swing and miss, and I'll raise you a Nicky two strikes. I'll see your Frank Schwindel who's got a mix. Brennan Davis is over here, and he's not huge swing and miss, but he's definitely not going to be a high contact guy, right? I mean, he's going to have some strikeouts in his game. Ian Happ's always going to have the strikeouts in his game. So how do you balance that? And so I think they did necessarily have to swing a little bit, no pun intended, to the other side of the spectrum, just because of how bad the roster had gotten, how imbalanced it had gotten. But you bring up a point, because if you move kind of heavily toward one end on that side, and you move really heavily toward pitching on the development side, I don't think they're going to neglect the other stuff, but you do kind of wonder, and that's where I think Hoyer's 3 to 5 year window that he keeps stating, I think that's where it comes in, because you've got to give this stuff all time to settle. I'm concerned with free agency. They desperately need to go out and spend some money, but what do they do in that? And is it something that they can actually do, or are they going to have to wait till like all this stuff gets settled and, hey, we're going to have a 2-week spring training and good luck, go sign your players, and hopefully you have them ready by opening day? It could get really weird. So I don't know.
That could work. That could work in the Cubs' favor if that actually ends up happening, right?
And and I was wondering this. I was sitting there thinking, like, if the players are legitimately concerned that there could be a work stoppage, like, does that motivate some of them to get a deal done prior to December 1st? Like, would they sit there and think, you know what, I don't want to be waiting, especially if I want a really big deal. I don't want to wait until, what if we're locked out until the start of April? I don't want to wait till then and then be scrambling and then have to sign some crappy short deal because nobody knew what the ramifications of this all were going to be. Oh, you want to offer me an 8-year deal? Cubs probably aren't doing many 8-year deals, or any, but I don't know. I'm interested in how that might impact the market, if at all. And maybe they all say, well, I don't want to do shit till we figure out what this is, and if there's going to be a salary floor and a salary cap and all that. So,
yeah, and I think what tends to get lost in the CBA negotiations is, and typically I think this is because the owners kind of make it this way, is that I think the perception from the outside world is that this is about, super rich baseball players against super rich owners. And at the end of the day, the CBA negotiations really are more about just kind of the standard baseball players. I mean, you don't have that many guys in Major League Baseball that are signed to these huge contracts. The majority of the guys that are playing in baseball are signed to pretty reasonable deals, and so I think that's important as we start to go through the CBA negotiations, is to remember this is the reason that the baseball side and Tony Clark is negotiating. It's for these younger guys. It's for these guys who don't have the big deals. And that's why, like Chris Bryant, for example, great example of a player who is one of those big contract guys, but the things that he does and the decisions that he makes about his contract and how he goes forward with, his agenda is very much related to trying to look to the guys at the back of the line and make sure he's doing right by them. And so it's important to keep that in mind as the CBA negotiations kind of go along.
Yeah. And I mean, I think where people get lost in seeing the extensions by Mookie Betts and Mike Trout and the monster deals from Bryce Harper and Francisco Lindor and Fernando Tatis. Well, that's all well and good, but the average salary this past season actually fell from $4.1 million to $3.7 million. And I know, right, like you say that to a lot of, and there will be plenty of people, just put that on Facebook. You got plenty of people, whoa, I could live on 3.7. Okay, that's not the point. The point is that as baseball continues to sign these multi-billion-dollar rights deals that are heavily predicated on the postseason, by the way, as we brought up with Turner Sports and with Fox and with ESPN, and as the game brings in more revenue and it's talking about operating its own local streaming service and things like that, for player salaries to have dropped by almost 10%, right? I think it's something in the neighborhood of 8%. Like for them to, or not that far. I'm sorry, it's like 5% from 4.1 to 3.7. So 400,000. So yeah, I guess it is almost 10. Jeez, I can't even do math. But anywhere, somewhere around 10%. That's unconscionable from a player perspective to look at it and say, our salaries drop and that's the overall, right? So think about how many guys it takes. If Bryce Harper's making $30 million a year, it takes a whole hell of a lot of players making a whole hell of a lot less to bring the average down to 3.7.
Exactly.
And the qualifying offer dropped by $500,000. And that's the average of the top 100 players in the league. So you're talking about not only did the top 100 players overall drop, you're talking about having a larger percentage of the money tied up, just like normal wealth is distributed, right? You're having a smaller number of very, very highly paid players making up a larger percentage of the pot. So then it goes down. So again, as you said, it's about how long does it take to get free agency? The other thing is, and here's the big one, I think the biggest single sticking point is owners are going to push for a salary floor, which on the surface sounds really, really good, except they want to also then institute a salary cap, like a hard cap versus what we have now. And it's only, they want it at $180 million, which is like 30 million, 28 million below what the luxury tax cap was, or the initial level of it. So the thought would be that, yes, these teams, there's more money spread out on the bottom end, and teams like the Rays and Pirates are going to have to spend more. But let's be honest. How many teams were below $100 million? And then how many other teams now will drop well below 180, right? And live down there as, oh, we can't hit that cap. So you're actually decreasing spending overall. That's what the owners are trying to do, is artificial, and it's not artificial, I guess,
as revenues go up.
Right. And that's really the key. Like if you said, hey, the cap will be 225 million and the floor will be 125, I think that's one thing. But baseball is the only sport that doesn't have a hard cap in place right now, and they are really, really, really opposed to that. But the owners are going to be like, but we put the floor in, guys. We have the floor here. But oh man,
I don't know, dude. Listen. If Tony Clark drops the ball again, he's got to go. I'm surprised he's lasted this long, to be honest with you. I think he's
not directly handling the negotiations as much, I think, behind.
I know, but he oversees them.
Yeah, I mean, he did such a bad job that the last time. I mean, there were so many issues there, But I really think, like, to me, it's the service time issue, which again is like complete bullshit. With the owners to go back, I'm like, oh, it's the 29.5 thing. I'm like, one way or the other. Yeah, but if a dude comes up, if it's Juan Soto and he comes up when he's 18 years old, having him under control for 11 years is not better for him. That's far worse. Now, if you're Wilson Contreras and you came up at 24, okay, that's pretty good for you, because you're talking about 5 years ish. But if you're Fernando Tatis, there is zero motivation then for those teams to extend these guys as early as they did, because now you're not worried about them going to free agency at 25 or 26 years old. You can wait till they're 29. So why the hell would I do anything in a negotiation with you? So that thing is bullshit to me, because now you're looking at, well, they'll get at least one contract offer when they're shy of 30. Yeah, but they're 29.
And that might impact the quality of baseball on the field, because what you might see is teams bringing on much more younger players. They more propensity to kind of start these younger guys and keep them in the minor leagues, and that's a whole nother story, is the whole minor league system. But they might feel like, hey, let's bring young guys. Let's have as young a team as we possibly can have, because the longer they're in the major leagues, if they get that, the 29-year-old cap, the better it is for the team, right? The more jerseys they sell, the more marketable the players become.
Yeah, and here's the thing: it solves, and I'm doing air quotes here for those of who are listening. It solves the service time issue of holding a guy back. Air guitar, air quotes.
Sorry,
because there's no longer an impetus for them to hold a guy back for that service time, because they've got that more locked in. But as you said there, that's going to be something that hurts those guys at the tail end, because how many of those, okay, well, instead of signing, Rex Brothers, or, throw out, a guy mid to late 30s reliever, instead of bringing that guy up, we're going to call up this 18 or 19-year-old, because now we can have him for longer. And the thing is, then you can, provided he's actually good enough, right? Like some team, if it's a competitive team, they're not necessarily going to just pull this guy up, but you do have that longer time to kind of let them work through things without worrying about starting that clock. Like, all right, dude, let's start it now, because now we're going to have all of his prime years under there. And you know, because one way or the other, if he's going to become a free agent at X age period, then you want as much time as you possibly can. But there again, how the players, older players, veterans probably aren't going to want that. And if I'm a younger dude and I'm saying I plan on being up there by, if you're a high school draftee and you can move up and be there by the time, you know, most guys aren't debuting at 18 or 19, but even if it's 21 or 22, do you want to be locked in through that whole time? You know, 6 years. Normally you could at least get to free agency by 28, you know, in a lot of those situations. So it's Patrick Wisdom would be the another one that would not be in that category. You know, it wouldn't matter. And so maybe some of those guys are like, hell yeah, man, let me be a free agent. Get me out of this. I don't have to go through arbitration. You know what I mean?
Well, but
Frank Schwindel.
think about the impact this will have on teams that are very good at developing players, younger players like Tampa, for example. Your Tampa, I mean, I don't see why they wouldn't want this, because, you know, they could just, you know, bring up all the young guys they want. They're very good at drafting and developing guys and plugging them into the system and having it work at the major league level. And then they'd be able to trade them before they hit their free agency,
or the Marlins,
and get a ton of picks back.
Although that's where the salary floor, to me, that's where the floor is absolutely necessary, because then you can't just call up a team of guys making the league minimum and having 10 of those guys on your team, because now that's only $5 million, $6 million that you're spending on, you know, more than a third of your roster. You've got to go out and pay some players from that point. And so that's there. But again, it's exactly what we talked about, though, with the deals that were going back and forth to restart the 2020 season, where the owners would just shuffle numbers around. And at the end, it was the same thing. It's just they're moving these numbers and making it look like it's a different deal, when in fact it was the same thing. So again, it's the same. They're saying we want a floor, but then they're going to lower the ceiling. Like, no, that doesn't actually help at that point, because you're still going to have then the teams that are at the bottom are going to clear the minimum barely and probably do it with some fun accounting, right? And then the teams at the top are going to spend less money than they would have before, because they're forced to. And so now again, you have less overall spending for a league that has already begun to spend less anyway. The qualifying offer, again, that in and of itself going down, and the average salary going down, because again, I want to point that out. Those are two separate figures, very separate figures. But the fact that they both went down is bad news for the players, and that absolutely is something that they're going to want to reverse the trend of, especially as those revenues continue to go up. And so it'll be interesting, man. I don't see the owners budging, and I know a lot of people think that the owners don't want to go another season with lost revenues. But as we've said before, what happens if there's no season? That means you're not paying anyone. So it doesn't cost a whole lot. They're losing out on revenues, but they're also losing out on all their expenditures. Most of them.
And they're coming off a season where they've just cut costs about as much as they can possibly cut costs. So, I mean, obviously they hired back most of the employees, but we don't know. I don't know across the board, you know, how many cuts were made and how much of those cuts actually were, you know, came back on the books. But I would assume that they're you know, in terms of their balance sheets, in as good a position as they could be going into a negotiation where they may actually end up having a work stoppage. Let me ask you one question on how Jed Hoyer will manage this team. You know, when Theo was in Jed's position as the president of baseball operations, it was his team, right? I mean, Jed was the general manager for, you know, title purposes, but it didn't seem like he was really making any decisions. It seemed like Theo was making all the decisions. Obviously, Jed is going to run things differently. It feels like he already is, but how much will this be Jed's team versus how much of this will be Carter Hawkins and Ehsan Bokhari's team?
You know, it's interesting because throughout the Epstein regime, right, they would talk about how it was a quote unquote, and this is Jed Hoyer's term, but a flat hierarchy where everybody had equal say and kind of the offices were open and it was all, but you always got the sense that Theo was the one pulling the strings at the end of the day, right? It felt like And it in the words afterward, read between the lines, it sort of has seemed like that, like to where, maybe he was a little too emotionally attached to some of these guys, and then it took him leaving and Jed Hoyer making the tough decisions. And while they did say like Hoyer would get on there and pound the table for some guys here and there and whatever, and then that would come through. I do kind of wonder how much of it was truly a delegation and how much of it was Theo wanting to kind of have, whether it was final sign off or having a little more control of things. I might be a little bit black and white on that, and I know there's some gray area in there, but this really does feel like, and I guess the other thing is too, that was also Theo and Jed and McCleod and a bunch of guys that they had brought over from quote unquote other organizations. Those guys were all together at Boston, right? They were all part of that Red Sox thing. So you sort of felt like it was the old boys club, and there's a bunch of guys who sort of thought and felt the same way and kind of knew one another really closely. Whereas now I think this is the entire reason Hoyer is bringing in guys who have made their names for themselves with other organizations, who have other kinds of thoughts, so that he can say, hey, give me some feedback. Let me know what you're thinking. How's this all working out? And then I do think he's going to delegate a little bit more authority down the way, because Hoyer's expertise is not in player development, right? It's not in the technology side necessarily. It's baseball ops, and it's so yeah. I think he will be the one, negotiating contracts and working out some of those deals and whatever. But I do think that there's going to be more of a truly progressive feel, because did you get the feeling that after, like, when they first blew into town, Epstein and Hoyer, and boy, this is going to be different. They're going to upgrade, new technology and better scouting and not this old school stuff. But you still got the sense that even after that all got improved, after those first couple years, that then it still stagnated. And there were no new voices. There weren't really any changes, and they kind of rested on their laurels. I don't know if you got that same sense. I'm sort of feeling that now, and I think this is a move to prevent that from happening again.
Yeah, I think retrospectively speaking, you could definitely see that happening. So hopefully, I guess we'll find out in the offseason, right? I mean, we know what the trend has been the last 3 or 4 years, just in terms of the inactivity of the Cubs in the offseason. So, I mean, if that same thing kind of happens and they bring on just kind of like no name free agents, and, there's really nothing that makes you say this is any different. Of course, it's a completely different team too, right? I mean, the last 3 or 4 years, all the Cubs, you felt like the Cubs needed was, 3 or 4 pieces maybe to get them to the World Series. And that was the one thing that they just didn't ever do. And so, it's like one of those obvious things too, where you're sitting there and you're like, oh my God, why don't they just do what it's obvious that they need to do? They never did. It never worked out. And so now you're in this situation where they really need to improve vastly. And it's hard to expect it to look any different, but in the same sense, it kind of has to look different, right? They've got different people at the helm, so we'll see if that was really something that like an edict of ownership, and whether that edict will continue, or whether there really is going to be a change in how they bring on guys and who they bring on in the offseason. So a lot of variables.
Yeah, it's going to be. I think we're going to see some differences again. Whether and how quickly we see that this first off season is definitely going to be, I think, up for grabs. And we may not find it right depending on what happens again with this CBA. It could be a while before we really see anything in terms of what these guys are trying to build at all, like even an inkling of it. So. I'm really, really hopeful that they do get this figured out, and that, maybe both sides will bend a little bit and on some of the things that they're looking for. But I'm still not real hopeful on the CBA front, just because of the things that are in there that at least we know of what ownership wants, that to me seems like a non-starter. But if that stuff gets worked out in enough time for us to see it, I think we'll learn a little bit from these free agent signings, because I don't think they're just going to go out and do 1 and 2 year deals. I do think they are going to look for a couple guys who can bridge the gap into that next competitive window, and maybe even fairly deep into it. It'll just be a matter of again, whether the money is actually there to do that to the extent that we hope it will be.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, who is it? McCleod, Jason McCleod has moved on from the organization. No real surprise there. Actually, kind of a relief, I guess. But it's kind of like, I always had really high hopes for Jason McCleod, and maybe I expected more from him than I should have. But he was, like you mentioned, he was one of the three guys. I just struggle to look at and try to figure out what is Jason McCleod's legacy with the Chicago Cubs.
I mean, I think the troublesome part is looking back on it, it feels like maybe he was put in a role for which he was not best suited. Just like I mentioned, Jed Hoyer's expertise is not really in player development. So let's say those roles had been reversed and that McCleod was the GM and Jed Hoyer was the VP of development and whatever. Would we be seeing the exact same thing play out, but just with different names, right? Would McCleod now be the president of baseball operations and making these moves, and Hoyer would be on his way out of the organization? And I kind of feel like that's sort of the deal because, and we saw like McCleod oversaw some of those changes and the farm development that saw the Cubs go to the number one farm system in baseball and develop a lot of these great players. However, a lot of that was because of the drafts that took place. And those players moved up really quickly and they had a bunch of top line guys. It became evident. And I think one of the areas, the lack of pitching development is probably going to be his public legacy. And I do want to address the question about Shiraz Raymond here in a little bit too, because there was that kind of cuts both ways. But the thing with McCleod then is that, at Cubs conference, like publicly admitting that they were not as aggressive as they should have been with pitching development, that they had to make some philosophical changes. And I'm like, it's good that you're acknowledging that, but literally everybody else has been saying this for 2 or 3 years. Like, it's already been obvious. How were you not being more aggressive? Why were you being so passive with this development in the first place? And I think that part was difficult in that I think he's a good motivator and manager of people and can serve well in a GM or president role. Honestly, when he can delegate that down, I do think that he personally was a little too conservative in the way he went about the role that he had, and he just wasn't a good fit for it. So it's going to be a muddied legacy, honestly. I mean, I don't think it's his fault. I think he was put in a position for which he was maybe not best suited, and the results are what they are. But hey, I mean, he still spent 10 years with the organization and is probably going to get a nice deal somewhere else. Maybe the Mets. Who knows? The job that no one wants.
Seriously.
We'll see.
Yeah, you mentioned Cubs convention. Just quickly, is there any word on Cubs convention?
No, I think they're going to try to just soft pedal that thing as much as they can, and there's no way they're going to do it. I mean,
There's no reason not to do it, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, if everyone's is masked up, and what's the problem?
If they're masked, if you show vax proof and all that, although
sure.
Here we are in almost November, and there's been zero word on it. I don't think, because here's the other thing though. Let's think about this. What kind of a season did the Cubs have? Do you think the Ricketts are going to want to run Cubs convention after the season they just had, trading all those guys? I think it's much, much easier for them on all fronts to be like, blah, 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 pandemic. Chicago's, they're hosting events at the United Center indoors now with a lot more people. I think there's no way they do it because they do not want to put up with all of it, because they know the feedback's going to be bad. And, there's issues with Marquis. Like, they're just going to get booed incessantly, even by the Pollyannas who normally show up. So I think we wait on that till next year. They'll do some virtual stuff that people can't boo them actively at. They can just keep everybody muted.
Yeah, exactly.
but I do want to. There's a question on here, and part of the reason I wanted to bring this up is interesting because we actually broke the news on Cubs Insider of Shiraz Raymond leaving the Cubs and going to the Rangers. Of course, I don't remember. Has he now left the Rangers? I can't remember.
I saw that he did.
Yeah,
I'm not.
Yeah, that's right. They parted ways. So, but at the time, so someone had reached out to me anonymously, we'll say, right? Because I'd written some things and talked him up pretty well. As being one of the smartest guys in the room, whatever. And this person was like, yeah, hey, I'm sorry I didn't share this or cite you because, realistically, there's some stuff there like dude made some really poor decisions internally, and it wasn't so much that, it was that he wanted out because, he can say after the fact, like, oh, I didn't have a voice. And then part of that's because, like, yeah, because when you talk, you fuck some stuff up. And so I think there was he was going to be on his way out. And it sounds as though perhaps that maybe was a bit of, and I wrote about this, I think I did mention that in a blurb, that he's out with the Rangers or whatever. So I and I think there's two sides to every story, right? And somebody might say, well, I wasn't part of the inner circle, I didn't get my voice heard as much. And I think there was probably a reason for that. We'll say that there were some, and again, that gets into player evaluation, right? He was heavily involved in that. And so when you look at some of the player evals and some of the pickups the Cubs made and other things, maybe they didn't, yeah, you can kind of see where that went. So I think there's a fairly good reason why he's maybe not with either of his past two employers.
So let me put this to you. So, at the trade deadline, when the Cubs were done making all their trades, I remember, what was that, a Friday? Was it Friday the 13th, I think? No, it wasn't the 13th. It was like the 30th or whatever, 31st, 30th. But it was a Friday, and I was in Chicago, and it was insane. And after everything was done and all the dust had settled, and we looked at kind of who had gone where, you had Kimbrel, you had a lot of players going to contenders. Kimbrel going to the White Sox, Javi going to the Mets, Bryant going to the Giants, Rizzo going to the Yankees, Marisnick going to the Padres, and Jock Pederson going to the Braves. And Jock was the first trade that was made. But at the time, you never would have guessed that it would have been Jock Pederson who would be the one who was having postseason success and had been part of leading his team to the World Series, and that none of those other guys were in the World Series. How surprised are you that it's played out that way?
I'm really surprised. I was gonna, maybe we'll address this as a comment in our live comments about Jed fancying himself a pitching coach, which I think can't be further from the truth. I don't know where that comes from. So it's a bit, so I was occupying, because I was looking at that, trying to wrap my head around it while you were asking me the question. But no, and I wrote that about Pederson yesterday because he wrote a piece in the Players Tribune, and it's wild to think about. Not only because it's Jock Pederson, who was by and large pretty disappointing for the Cubs, outside of, like, he looked like he was going to be a stud for them. And he was hitting all kinds of home runs. He's like, came out.
He tore it up at spring training, remember?
Just killed it in spring training. We had like 9 home runs or something like that.
Yeah.
And then just wasn't hitting. And then he kind of caught on. But great personality. But what is wild is that at the time of the trade, did you read my piece and look at my tweets about this? Do you have all this?
Yeah,
I always ask this.
Okay. And I'm aware of the situation.
But I guess for those who are out there, if you didn't already see, like, when the Cubs made that trade, and it was during the All-Star break, they were 45-46. They were 2 games under. They were in 3rd place in their division, and they were tied with the Cardinals at the time, right? The Reds were ahead of them. The Braves were 44-45 in 3rd place in their division and 4 games out. The Cubs were 8 games out of 1st, but so were the Cardinals, right? The Cardinals were 4 games back of 2nd place. The Cardinals picked some guys up, go on a run, made the wild card. The Braves picked some guys up after they had lost Ronald Acuna Jr., by the way, their best player. Picked some guys up, and now they're in the World Series. And
up 1-0.
Yeah, they're winning so far in the World Series. And that's, as I said in this piece, I'm not indicating that, like, well, the Cubs could have got some guys and done the same thing, but because the Braves do have better pitching. And
they're younger. They didn't have as many guys who are going to term out at the end of the year. So
yeah,
all that.
It's a different scenario. Although Freddie Freeman still doesn't have an extension, and that's a pretty big deal for them. But it's interesting to see how you can make a few tweaks, get on a bit of a run. And that's what the Cardinals did, right? They won like 55 games in a row. Then I don't think they lost in the second half. That's obviously not true, but they did have a tremendous winning streak in there. And so you can make that. Just funny to see that that's really the start of the Yu Darvish trade was the start of the Cubs waving the white flag, but during the season, that was a huge change. And so, the Braves were behind. interestingly enough, the Mets, who were in first place most of the season, right, and then the Phillies, neither of whom went on to do anything there. And so to see how that worked out with the Braves and the run that they were able to go on, and with Pederson being a large part of that, just not only with his bat, right? And he's hitting home runs with Anthony Rizzo's bat, of all people, right? But he's got the pearl necklace and the blonde hair, and he's all fired up. And it's Jocktober again. And we saw that with him with the Dodgers, like where he would just show out, a huge home run in the World Series last year in the fake asterisk World Series that the Dodgers won. But there is something to be said for creating that vibe. And that's what the piece that he wrote about was, and just kind of bringing that together, and how those guys in Atlanta all sort of meshed really, really well. And I think that's something that we saw for a minute with the Cubs. But really, when you start looking at it, and we started breaking it down after that May that they had, things just a little bit before that, and certainly after that, they felt like they were a bunch of individuals rather than a team. And you started to see that. And that's what happens when guys don't know where the hell they're going to end up. And they do all end up on different teams, because Pederson thought he was going to get traded again. Like, he thought he might get flipped by the Braves.
Days.
How bad would that
I think that
suck?
was just a rumor that was kind of out there. I don't know there was any.
No, but they said that to him. They were like, "Hey, dude, don't get comfortable." Like, somebody told him that when he got to Atlanta. Like, don't get comfortable. You might get moved again. But that was more because they were in the same position the Cubs were. If the Braves lose 11 games from the time he gets traded there, he's gone again. They're done. You know what I mean? They would have dropped out of it, but they didn't. And it's funny what happens when you start stringing together wins.
And that, going back to, and when I'm thinking about the Cubs and kind of how they got into this situation in the first place, it's just like, if there's one thing that we all should have learned, it's that, where the Cubs had this young team that won the World Series, kind of ahead of when they were expected to arrive. I think the expectation wasn't 2016. I think it was more of 17 and 18 with the guys and kind of where they were in their contracts and the development and everything. So it came early. And when you do that and you have young players, but it wasn't a secret that these guys' contracts were going to end at the same time. And that's what I just can never get past, but hopefully Jed has learned, is that even though you have a tremendous amount of success with a team, it doesn't mean you want to continue going down that path and going all in year after year after year until you get to the point where you have to make a decision on, 7 of the guys all at the same time. They should have traded 1 or 2 of the guys somewhere along the way. And while that doesn't, make for good press, if you're the Cubs, because people, get attached to players and whatnot, it's a heck of a lot better than timing out and having to do what they just did. That's to me, that's the most ridiculous part of what they did. Is they could have traded Schwarber right after the 2016 season. It wouldn't have been a popular move, but it would have saved them a lot of heartache right now if they would have done that for him and maybe 1 or 2 other players.
Well, yeah. I mean, what if they make a different decision on him versus Soler, right? They traded Soler for Wade Davis, and that kind of ended up, of course, now you've got Schwarber, and I don't remember, it was last week when we see, like, how far up your ass was your head collectively that Schwarber had to go someplace else. And sometimes it takes that, right? It takes a different perspective, but to get him down in that squatted stance again and look at the season he was having with Washington, and now that it is kind of funny that, like, both Jorge Soler and Kyle Schwarber have been batting leadoff for their respective teams. Like, that's, definitely not prototypical leadoff hitters, but
in a position that the Cubs had struggled with for years after Dexter Fowler left.
And one of them was Kyle Schwarber, that they tried to make that work and it just didn't. And there was other weird stuff there, but again, they hung on to him. And at a certain point, and I would say that they once they figured out they couldn't extend them, but they never really had meaningful extent. Like, the tough part for me to wrap my head around is not that they didn't trade them and not that they didn't extend them when they could have early on, but that I really think, and somebody had an article out there about it, and it was mostly about Chris Bryant in particular, but you kind of got the feeling that the plan the whole time was to let it happen the way it did, was to let these guys play everything out and try to squeeze as much juice out of those oranges as what they could. And then, and it's like the microcosm of that would be what they did with Aroldis Chapman. When they picked him up, they're like, we're going to throw this dude every day. And when we get to the playoffs, he's going to pitch in every game, multiple innings if he has to. We really don't care if his arm falls off because we are not going to re-sign him. And he'll just be gone after the season. Now, they did end up trading these guys all at the end. But, I mean, if you look at it, like, they did get down the road a little bit with Javi on some talks, and that was the only one that, like, publicly both sides sort of acknowledged. With Rizzo, it was acknowledged the whole time that, like, they never really made an offer that they thought would be amenable to him. They knew that. They never really engaged with Chris Bryant in a meaningful way. They haven't really gotten down the road with Wilson Contreras. So none of this stuff really happened. The only guy that they extended from a position player perspective was David Bodie, who approached them about it, which is still looking kind of interesting on their end. But
looking smart on his end.
Yeah, no shit.
He's like, God, I'm not that good. I better sign quickly.
But you kind of feel like this is what they wanted, to where they could put out enough of an effort that they could say publicly that, hey, we tried. You know, these guys just didn't want to be here, which is bullshit. And you know, then they could kind of get away with doing this. And then, not that they really wanted to reset, but I think it was kind of like, hey, we're cool with it if these dudes want to re-sign at a really low level. And some of that might have been that they simply didn't have the budget to do it. That they knew at a certain point, they were like, shit, well, we're not going to have the money over here in the next 3 years to do this. So it's a mix of things. I don't want to say it's as black and white as like they drafted them, called them up, and we're like, we're never actually going to extend these guys. We're going to have to end up trading them. But yeah, I don't think they ever wanted. I think when they called them all up, they knew damn well. They did. They said this. We knew we weren't going to extend all of them, but like, to not extend any of them that's a little bit egregious. I think, you know, you don't keep anybody. Come on, man. Look at the Giants. Like, everybody on their team is 37 years old. They've all played with the Dodgers for the last 20 years. You know, like, you can still be okay with a bunch of older players. Just got to be balanced. So whatever, man. It's just kind of a weird. I've got some thoughts on there, I guess, but we'll see. I don't think any of it's black and white at all. But I also don't think that they really ever had a strong intention of signing any of those guys to anything other than a very club-friendly extension, which Anthony Rizzo already did several years ago. So he's like,
yeah, exactly.
Screw you guys. I'm not doing another one of those. Like,
and then if that's your approach, then why don't you take the smart move and just be like, all right, hey, we're going to need to trade some of these guys along the way. And so that's right. The thing that just never happened. It's like, why wait to the very last minute? An approach that appears that they're going to be taking with Wilson Contreras. And it's just like, come on, man.
Yeah, you wait till the value is all the way gone. Like, oh, hey, Wilson's going to turn 30 in May as a catcher who we've overused already. Well, sure. That's the best time to get value out of a catcher. He's got 4 months left on his contract. He's 30 plus years old, and he's been catching way too much. They
could have restocked their entire system by trading Kyle Schwarber after 2016. I mean, the return that they would have got, it was
shit. They could have gotten Andrew Miller for trading him when he had a torn ACL. Of course, then that might have hurt him in the World Series, right? That was a different deal at the time. He was able to come back and do that. It was like, all right, man, his value is never going to get any higher, and that's again the issue is you run the risk. You either trade him when their value is really high, and all of a sudden that guy's going to get even that much better. Or you wait and you hold on and you wait till their value is so low that you can't get anything for them. And they sure as hell love holding on to guys till their value is all but gone. And then like, well, get a couple prospects for you. Cool. Oh, well.
Yeah. And hindsight's always 20/20. You know, I mean, it's easier to talk about these things now that we can kind of look back and you're further and further away from it. So it becomes a little easier to define, I think, and it becomes a little bit more black and white instead of gray. But still. Things could have been different, but instead here we are facing having to watch two former Cubs players hit home runs in the World Series and facing an inevitable lockout or strike or something with this CBA. How does that work? It doesn't become a lockout like right away, right? Does the season have to do they have to wait for like pitchers and catchers?
I mean, I think they can do it whenever they want, I guess. Although
They wouldn't be motivated to do it right away, would they?
Right, because like they want to lock them out so they don't have to pay them. It's just like we no, you don't get to use the facilities. Like, we're not paying you a damn thing. And then is it a strike right away? I think it just everything kind of gets suspended. It's technically a work stoppage because there's no contract under which they're actually operating as far as anything new going on. So I think any new business is suspended, and then it would be at whatever point the league year is supposed to start. I think that's when the lockout technically begins, because it's at that point that players would normally, although, I mean, I guess they could lock them out and say, well, we're not even going to give you, at will access to team facilities and that sort of thing. Like, no, you're on your own. And so I think in that regard, I suppose I don't really know what the rules are around that, but those guys aren't getting paid, like none of them are getting paid during that time anyway. So I think it's really the important part is once the league year is set to start and those guys are going to start getting paid, that's when it really matters. But they'll lock them out of spring training, do all that stuff. So,
well, it should be fun. So we'll probably have some things to talk about, and then really rant.
Absolutely, yay!
Before, so it should be lots of fun. But all right, well, it's been a good show. I'd say it's probably time for us to go and do other things with our day besides talk about the Cubs and stress out about them.
What?
I know. Unfortunately, we do have to go, but
yeah,
we love you all you viewers. And please, if you guys are watching the show on the video right now, go and subscribe to the podcast version of the show, because that's really where we're trying to grow. I mean, obviously, we love people watching the webcast, but we want to grow that podcast as much as possible. So,
and give us like a 5-star rating over there. Even if you think we're only worth a 3 or 4, if you could just do a 5, that'd be awesome.
Just lie for us.
Yeah, it'd be Apple doesn't care, clearly. So give us or wherever you get your podcasts. But iTunes would be great if you go on there, give us a 5-star rating. And if you're not already, speaking of, if you are watching this on YouTube and you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, that would be cool too. You can watch videos of Javi fielding ground balls, which people freaking love, apparently. So
1.6 million of them.
Damn. I'm gonna go field some ground balls, take some video.
That video is by far and away our most popular video, and I have no idea. And people watch it for like 2 minutes. People are really fascinated by Javier Baez. I think him being in New York maybe helps that video. I don't know.
Yeah, they're searching for it and it's popping up. There we go. Mets fans.
There you go.
It's one thing they're good for.
All right, everybody, have a great rest of your week and have a good weekend. We'll see you next week.
See ya.